Good evening, everybody. Today we are going to discuss about dysphagia, nausea, vomiting, and indigestion. Am I audible? Is the screen visible? Hello?
Hi,
Okay.
Teresa.
Okay. So objectives are to discuss about all those three topics under headings of definition, approach, diagnostics, and treatment. Coming to dysphagia, its definition is difficulty in swallowing, and it refers to problems with the transit of food or liquid from the mouth to the hypopharynx or through the esophagus. Severe dysphagia can compromise nutrition, cause aspiration, and reduce quality of life. So, dysphagia, main problem is dysphagia as such. Other problems associated with it are nutritional compromise and aspiration. Terminologies associated are aphasia, that is, inability to swallow, complete esophageal obstruction, most commonly encountered in acute setting of either foreign body obstruction, food bolus obstruction, and the Mari. Odonophagia is painful swallowing, typically results because of mucosal ulceration within the oropharynx or esophagus. Then globus pharyngeus, it is a foreign body sensation localized in the neck that does not interfere with swallowing and sometimes relieved by swallowing. Mostly psychiatric condition. Transfer dysphagia because it results in nasal regurgitation and pulmonary aspiration during swallowing and is characteristic of oropharyngeal dysphagia. Phagophobia is fear of swallowing and refusal to swallow food. It may be psychogenic or related to anticipatory anxiety about food bowls obstruction, odonophagia, or aspiration. Physiology of swallowing, which has been already discussed, it is mainly the bolus of food is formed as a result of chewing, and there is upward pushing of tongue so that the bolus goes backward, and the soft palate is raised above, causing closure of the nasal cavity, and the food bolus propels forward into the esophagus. It is mainly because of contraction of the pharyngeal muscles as well as elevation of the laryngeal inlet. Thereby, food travels into the esophagus. So, a bolus enters the oropharynx, it touches the trigger points. A reflex is initiated in which the constrictors relax to dilate the pharynx, that is, the upper esophageal sphincter relaxes. The pharynx and larynx are raised by the longitudinal muscles, and the bolus is propelled over the epiglottis by the action of constrictors contracting in sequence, and the larynx is then closed by contracting the muscles of the laryngeal inlet. So, classification of dysphagia is mainly based on location and based on pathology. Based on location, it can be oral dysphagia, pharyngeal, or esophagus. Based on pathological, it can be structural dysphagia or propulsive or motor dysphagia. Before going to the topic as such, we have to have an idea about the motor supply and sensory supply of the pharynx and larynx, so that we can know what are all the nerves involved, which might be involved, which can lead to dysphagia. So the cranial nerves which are mainly involved are masticatory muscle. In terms of trigeminal nerve is supplying the masticatory muscle, mainly involved in chewing and the initiation of swallowing. Facial nerve is going to be involved in it also aids in swallowing again. Glossopharyngeal nerve supplies the stylopharyngeus, not of much relevance in case of swallowing. It comes in this is a pharyngeal muscle. Vagus nerve is mainly involved in palatal muscles, and it also has motor supply to the muscles of the palate and pharyngeal constrictors also, and aids in swallowing. Uh, Hypoglossal nerve is mainly the nerve supply to the intrinsic muscles of tongue, and it helps in chewing and swallowing as well. Coming to the sensory innervation of oral cavity, palate, and the pharynx. The palate here is supplied by trigeminal nerve, maxillary nerve, the anterior portion, as well as by the facial nerve, and the soft palate is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve, and the terminal portion of tongue is supplied mainly by the vagus nerve, uh, as well as uh, glossopharyngeal nerve. The pharynx as such is mainly supplied by the pharyngeal plexus, which is formed by the vagus and glossopharyngeal nerve. Uh, so predominantly, the main sensation of dysphagia is going to be felt by the patient only if the afferent nerves from these sensory areas are reaching the brain. Only then patient can recognize dysphagia. So the oral and pharyngeal dysphagia, coming to topic proper, This is mostly considered together oropharyngeal dysphagia. The oral phase dysphagia is associated with poor bolus formation and control, so that the food has prolonged retention within the oral cavity and may seep out of the mouth. So associated findings can be drooling and difficulty in initiating swallowing are other characteristic signs associated here. So poor bolus control is a main problem, and because there can be food spillage into the larynx and can cause aspiration as a complication of this symptom. The signs and symptoms are of concomitant hoarseness and other cranial dysfunction can also be associated in oropharyngeal dysphagia. Uh, Main causes are neurologic, structural, and iatrogenic. These three are the most common causes. Neurological causes are seen in CVAs, which is usually asymmetric dysphagia, Parkinson's disease, and ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Structural lesions can be Zenker's diverticulum, cricopharyngeal bar, and neoplasias. Iatrogenic is usually surgery and irradiation, mostly secondary to head and neck cancers or other malignancies. Other causes include muscular, infectious, and metabolic causes. We'll see one by one. Zenker's diverticulum, the structural cause, it is nothing but is related to the stenosis of the cricopharyngeus. It causes diminished opening of the upper esophageal sphincter. Because of increased pressure, there is a mucosal pulsion diverticulum that is created and above the cricopharyngeus muscle at the point of weakness, which is known as Killian dehiscence. This Zenker's diverticulum typically is encountered in elderly patients. Next heading is cricopharyngeal bars. It is nothing but it is a prominent indentation behind the lower end of the cricoid cartilage. A cricopharyngeal bar is a radiological finding, and mostly patients will have a transient cricopharyngeal bars only, and which are actually asymptomatic. Cricopharyngeal bars can be associated with other neuromuscular disorders as well. It is a finding in barium swallow. Here, cricopharyngeal bar is easy to distinguish in liquid barium is when it's seen as an indentation in the oropharynx in the upper esophagus, that is below the cricopharyngeus region. Coming to esophageal dysphagia, this we have already seen, that is distended. The esophageal lumen is about 2 centimeter in the AP diameter and 3 centimeter in the lateral plane. Circumferential lesions are mostly the ones which are causing this dysphagia rather than incomplete circumferential lesions. Lesions include Schatzki's rings, eosinophilic esophagitis, and peptic ulcers. Dysphagia can also occur in settings of GERD without a stricture and is because of the altered esophageal sensation and reduced esophageal mural distensibility or motor dysfunction. All this can also cause esophageal dysphagia. Propulsive disorders, coming to the next headings, it is mainly because of the abnormalities of the peristalsis or deglutitive inhibition, which happens in swallowing phase. The upper esophagus, as we all know, it is striated, and so when striated muscle is involved, it is mostly going to be in the regions of oropharynx and the cervical esophagus, oropharyngeal dysphagia. And smooth muscle involving lesions are going to be seen in thoracic esophagus and the lower esophageal sphincter. In propulsive disorders, it is mainly going to be because of absent peristalsis, which can be either complete absence of swallow-induced contraction, there is absent contractility, or the presence of non-peristaltic or disordered contractions can also be reasons of propulsive disorders. Mainly three are there. One is eclasia. It is because of absent peristalsis and failure of deglutitive lower esophageal sphincter relaxation. Diffuse esophageal spasm is a disordered motility restricted to the esophageal body. And scleroderma, it is mainly absent contractility combined with severe weakness of LES in a non-specific pattern commonly seen. These three are the propulsive disorders associated. Coming to the approach, it has already been discussed in the previous class, but again briefing on it. Dysphagia, it can be either oropharyngeal or esophageal dysphagia. Oropharyngeal, it can be structural or propulsive. Structural oropharyngeal causes are going to be mainly Zenker's diverticulum, neoplasm, or cervical web. In propulsive causes, it can be either neurogenic or myogenic. Neurogenic causes, which you already saw, that is CVS, Parkinson's, and ALS can cause oropharyngeal dysphagia. In myogenic causes, myasthenia gravis, polymyositis, and mixed connective tissue disorders, all this can cause propulsive or myogenic dysphagia. Coming to esophageal dysphagia, it is going to be further divided as again propulsive or structural. Usually structural is going to cause solid dysphagia, that is dysphagia to solid foods alone. Propulsive dysphagia is mostly going to be dysphagia to both solid and liquid. As we already saw, propulsive dysphagia is going to be mainly these three things: achalasia, diffuse esophageal spasm, and scleroderma. In structural causes, it can be either intermittent or persistent causes. Intermittent causes is going to be Schatzki ring and other structural causes like esophageal web or even neoplasias. Persistent or associated with odonophagia, it is going to be mainly infectious causes, infectious esophagitis and pill esophagitis. We'll again further proceed. Coming to the history or in terms of approach to the patient, key elements of history are going to be localization of dysphagia, the circumstances in which the patient experiences dysphagia, and other symptoms which are going to elicit in history. So in case of oropharyngeal dysphagia, patient will localize the dysphagia to the areas of in the suprasternal notch region. Patient can have associated nasal regurgitation, cough can be present, hoarseness can be present, indicating the laryngeal involvement. Esophageal dysphagia also, patient is going to localize dysphagia to his chest. In 30% cases, he can also localize dysphagia to suprasternal notch region. So there is some referred symptoms to the suprasternal notch. So upper esophageal symptoms, we should not only think only of oropharyngeal dysphagia, we should also think of esophageal dysphagia. So when hoarseness comes in the beginning, followed by dysphagia, mostly it is going to be a laryngeal cause of dysphagia. If dysphagia comes before hoarseness, it is mostly we should think of malignancy, recurrent laryngeal nerve involvement. It is just a clue to proceed with the symptoms. Based on the type of food we are going to be, it is going to give us clues regarding the causes of dysphagia. It can be dysphagia to solid food or both the solid and liquid food. If it is going to be solid food and if it is intermittent, it is mostly structural causes of dysphagia, as in Schatzki ring or eosinophilic esophagitis. If it is going to be both solid and liquid food, it is mostly motor or propulsive dysphagia. It is mainly those three symptoms causes which we saw already. Achalasia, DS, or scleroderma can be the reasons. Exceptions to this rule, however, are despite having a motor abnormality or propulsive dysphagia, patients with scleroderma usually have dysphagia to only solids. Rather than both solids and liquids, patients with scleroderma have mainly dysphagia to solids alone. However, patients with oropharyngeal dysphagia often have a greater difficulty in managing liquids than solids. So initiating swallowing is going to be difficult for them in cases of oropharyngeal dysphagia, and patients have difficulty in swallowing liquids than solids rather than only solids, as we earlier saw. So other relevant histories are going to be a prolonged history of heartburn preceding the onset of dysphagia is going to be suggestive of a peptic stricture. Infrequently, even esophageal adenocarcinoma can also have a prolonged history. History of prolonged nasogastric intubation, esophageal or head and neck surgery, ingestion of caustic agents or pills, previous irradiation chemotherapy, all this is going to help us isolate the reasons for dysphagia. Chest pain can be frequently accompanying dysphagia. Patient may tell the symptom as chest pain rather than dysphagia as such. Accompanied odonophagia, we should definitely think of infectious or pill-induced esophagitis, or even ulcers can have associated pain. A strong history of atopy, we should think of eosinophilic esophagitis, especially in younger male patients. Physical examination, what are we going to concentrate is mainly the mouth, pharynx, and oral cavity. Neck, we should look for thyromegaly significantly, which is going to cause dysphagia. Signs of bulbar or pseudobulbar palsy associated with dysarthria, dysphonia, ptosis, tongue atrophy, and hyperactive jaw jerk. All these can result in dysphagia, oropharyngeal dysphagia. Changes in the skin can have help us diagnose other causes like multiple connective tissue disorders, lichen planus, pemphigoid. In all these conditions where esophagus, that is a mucosa, can also be involved, so patient can have dysphagia. So diagnostic procedure, if it is oropharyngeal or upper esophageal problem, we are going to use fluoroscopic swallow study, which is done by a swallow therapist. It is a procedure of choice. For suspected esophageal dysphagia, upper endoscopy is the single most useful test. With this endoscopy, mostly causes of various causes of dysphagia can be identified, and endoscopic or histological abnormalities are evident. They are going to be confirmatory for causes like Schatzki's ring, esophageal reflux disease, and eosinophilic esophagitis. Coming to the treatment with dysphagia depends on both the locus and the specific etiology. Dysphagia resulting from a CVA usually, but not always, it usually improves in the first few weeks after the event. Most severe and persistent cases may require gastrostomy and enteral feeding. Majority of causes of esophageal dysphasias are effectively managed by means of esophageal dilatation using a bougie or balloon dilators during the procedure of endoscopy itself. And eosinophilic esophagitis has emerged as an important cause of dysphagia, amenable to avoiding the dietary allergens and also using topical glucocorticoids. It has been proven to be beneficial. Coming to the next heading, nausea and vomiting. So, nausea is a subjective feeling of a need to vomit, and vomiting is the emesis or the oral expulsion of the gastrointestinal contents due to gut and thoracoabdominal wall contractions. Terminologies associated here are regurgitation. Regurgitation is an effortless passage of gastric contents into the mouth, and rumination is repeated regurgitation of food residue, followed by rechewing and re-swallowing. That is rumination. Physiology of vomiting. Vomiting is mainly it's also a reflex mediated by vomiting center, which is in the medulla, having muscarinic receptors. Other important centers which stimulate the vomiting center are chemoreceptor triggersome, which is also present in the medulla. It has multiple receptors, including dopamine D2 receptors, 5-HT3 receptors, NK1 receptors, which is stimulated by substance P, and vasopressin. Vasopressin is also one of a stimulator for a CTZ. This CTZ is present outside the blood-brain barrier. Another key point which we should remember. Other stimuli include stimulation of vestibular nuclei, which is present in the pons, mediated by histamine 1 receptors and muscarinic receptors. It is a reason for morning sickness and motion sickness. Other higher cortical centers involvement, like on seeing unpleasant stimulus, like even when we see another person vomiting, we have a sensation to vomit, or seeing unpleasant uh, food, or having to smell unpleasant things, vomiting can be stimulated. This is mainly because of the higher cortical center stimulation, mainly through cannabinoid CB1 receptor, and gastric enterochromaffin cells release serotonin and stimulate the afferent vagus nerve and result in vomiting, by in turn stimulating the vomiting center. So what we should understand is there are various receptors or various areas associated with vomiting, and which are finally stimulating the vomiting center, and which results in the vomiting reflex. So what we again saw is vomiting and nausea, which is stimulated by stimulation of the vomiting center in the medulla. The stimulus can be multiple causes, mainly the CTS, chemoreceptor triggersome, which is present at the base of the fifth ventricle outside the blood-brain barrier, having multiple receptors like serotonin receptors, muscarinic receptor, NK1 receptor, and dopamine receptors also. And vestibular apparatus is also another stimulus, and gastrointestinal afferents from the GIT also have stimulation of the vomiting center, resulting in vomiting. So the vomiting reflex is nothing but there is going to be reverse of swallowing reflex. That is, what happens is there is forceful contraction of the abdominal muscles and diaphragm, and there is going to be reverse peristaltic contractions stimulated from the vomiting center, and the patient is going to have associated vasoconstriction, increased salivation, and tachycardia and tachyandria. Tachyandria is increased peristaltic contractions. I mean, retrograde peristaltic contractions, and abdominal muscle contractions also going to be present in vomiting. So what happens is, distally, migratory gut contractions are normally regulated by electrical phenomena, the enteric gut nerve system. So the slow waves, which are happening at a cycle of 3 cycles per minute in the stomach and 11 cycles per minute in the duodenum, or this usually happening migrating gut contractions is going to stop. And when vomiting reflex is started, the slow wave is abolished, and it is replaced by an orally propagated spike that evokes retrograde contractions and assists in expulsion of the gut contents. So mainly there is going to be contraction of the abdominal muscles and contraction of the diaphragm, which is and initiation of retrograde peristalsis, causing expulsion of the gut contents. That is mainly the vomiting reflex. Causes of nausea vomiting, which we are going to be classifying as 3 causes: intraperitoneal GI causes, extraperitoneal causes, and medications or metabolic disorders which cause nausea vomiting. Intraperitoneal causes is going to be mostly related to the GI tract as such. Obstructing disorders like pyloric obstruction, small bowel obstruction can cause vomiting. Enteric infections like viral bacterial infections, inflammatory diseases like cholecystitis, pancreatitis, appendicitis, which is going to cause irritant afferent stimulus to the vagus nerve and result in vomiting. Um, Altered sensory motor functions, as in cases of gastroparesis, intestinal pseudo-obstruction, GER, and syndromes associated with vomiting can also be having vomiting as a cause of intraperitoneal causes. And biliary colic and abnormal irradiation, all this can cause vomiting. Extraperitoneal causes, other system involvements like cardiopulmonary disease like cardiomyopathy, MI can cause vomiting. Labyrinthine diseases like motion sickness, labyrinthitis can cause. Intracerebral disorders like malignancy, hemorrhage can cause. And psychiatric illness like anorexia, bulimia nervosa causes voluntary stimulant. Self-stimulated vomiting can be present, and post-operative vomiting is another important criteria. Area of interest, and the next causes associated can be medications or metabolic disorders. Drugs mainly are cancer chemotherapy, antibiotics, cardiac antiarrhythmics. Digoxin can cause. Oral hypoglycemic agents and contraceptives one can be one of the important reasons. Restless legs and Parkinson's therapies can also result in. And other endocrine metabolic diseases like pregnancy, uremia, ketoacidosis, thyroid and parathyroid disorders can also be having vomiting. And toxins like as in case of ethanol consumption or liver failure, all this can also result in vomiting. So coming to brief discussion on each topic, intraperitoneal causes mainly because of, we already saw, visceral obstruction and inflammation of the bowel, hollow or solid viscera, both can elicit vomiting. Biliary colic is another important reason causing nausea. It acts on local afferent nerves, resulting in stimulation of the vomiting center. Vomiting in case of pancreatitis, cholecystitis, and appendicitis results from, again, visceral irritation and induction of ileus. Enteric infections, both viral and bacterial, like norovirus and rotavirus, and bacterial Staphylococcus aureus and Bacillus cereus can cause vomiting. And opportunistic infections like CMV, HSV induces vomiting in immunocompromised individuals. Vomiting syndromes, like intraperitoneal causes, it can be these three things. Chronic nausea and vomiting syndrome, it is defined as a bothersome nausea at least one day, and having one or more vomiting episodes weekly in the absence of any other eating disorder or psychiatric disease, can result in a chronic nausea vomiting syndrome. And cyclic vomiting syndrome, it is seen in 3 to 14% of the cases. And unexplained nausea vomiting, other organic causes should be ruled out. As the term suggests, cyclic, the patient can have associated symptoms like migraine headaches. So it can also be a type of migraine variant also. And cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, it is present with in patients with chronic cannabinoid intake. Here, a patient is going to have cyclical vomiting with intervening periods of intervening periods. The patient is going to be well. When the patient stops eating cannabinoid, using cannabinoid, patient is going to be symptom free. Other medications, importantly, which we are going to see are drugs, which can either stimulate the local stomach and causes vomiting, or it can be because of area postrema stimulation. That is, area postrema is nothing but the CT, the chemoreceptor trigger zone, which is not which is situated outside the blood-brain barrier. When it is stimulated, it can cause vomiting. And other emetogenic agents include mainly, as we already saw, antibiotics, cardiac antiarrhythmics, hypertensives, oral hypoglycemic agents, antidepressants, all these can cause vomiting. Specifically, smoking cessation drugs like varenicline and nicotine and contraceptives, all these can cause vomiting and nausea. A note on cancer chemotherapy agents. It can be when cancer chemotherapy agents are used, the vomiting can be acute within hours or hours of administration, or it can be delayed, which can happen after 1 or 2 or more than 1 day, or anticipatory. So the acute emesis is mainly because of mediated through certain pathways, and delayed emesis is mediated through NK1 mechanisms. And anticipatory nausea may respond to anxiolytic therapy rather than antiemetics. So approach to nausea and vomiting in terms of history and physical examination is, in history helps defining the etiology of nausea and vomiting. Based on time, we can have an idea of what can be the cause of vomiting. Within hours of eating can be gastroparesis or pyloric obstruction. Within few minutes after consumption, it can be in case of rumination syndrome. And vomiting occurring later can be because of intestinal obstruction. So based on time of eating and vomiting, we can come to some idea we can have regarding the cause for vomiting. Based on the content of the vomitus, we can again have causes like, as in case of hematemesis, it can be a malignancy or ulcer induced bleed, ulcer induced vomiting. If it is fecal content, the obstruction can be distal colonic obstruction. And if it is undigested food, we should definitely think of Zenker's diverticulum or achalasia. And if it is bilious, it definitely rules out gastric obstruction, because gastric obstruction, it is the vomitus is going to be non-bilious. So if the vomitus is bilious, we should think of causes beyond the second part of duodenum. Other associated factors which help us delineating the causes of vomiting include pain relieved with vomiting. When once patient vomits, his pain is relieved, we can definitely think of intestinal obstruction. If there is no change in pain after vomiting also, it can be pancreatitis or cholecystitis, that is inflammatory causes of vomiting. And profound weight loss when associated, we should think of malignancy. Associated fever, we should think of inflammation. And tinnitus, vertigo, labyrinthine diseases, and headache associated, we can think of intracranial causes like bleed, tumor, or anything like that. Coming to physical examination, it is going to complement the history, and we can have an idea regarding the hydration status of the patient, which indirectly indicates the severity of vomiting. Reduced skin turgor, sunken eyes, and orthostatic hypotension is going to tell us the intravascular volume is low, and the patient is having severe vomiting. When there is absent bowel sounds, we should think of ileus, and high-pitched rushes or increased bowel sounds, we should think of bowel obstruction. Succussion splash, we should think of gastroparesis or pyloric obstruction. And the neurological diseases which will present with associated findings of papilledema, visual field loss, or focal neurological deficits. And the neoplasm, there can be a palpable mass or lymphadenopathy associated. Pulmonary abnormalities, which we should definitely think of aspiration, which is again indication of mostly in complication of vomiting. That is, a patient has aspirated the vomitus. Diagnostic tests, basic CBC is going to help us find iron deficiency, which is indirectly going to indicate mucosal injury. RFT electrolytes, hypokalemia it can be present as a complication of vomiting. A renal failure because of severe volume loss, AKA, can be present. LFT, amylase lipase, is going to help us delineate pancreatobiliary diseases. And in ABG, patient can have metabolic alkalosis. Mostly severe vomiting, when we are not able to find accurate causes, we are going to think of upper endoscopy, which is going to detect ulcers, malignancy, and retain food residues in gastroparesis. And small bowel barium radiography or CT can help us diagnose partial bowel obstruction. Colonoscopy or contrast enema helps in finding colonic obstruction. And CT MRI brain helps us finding intracranial diseases. And mesenteric angiogram CT or MRI is useful for suspected ischemia. Special tests used are GI motility testing, which can detect underlying motor disorder. We can find gastroparesis using gastric scintigraphy, which measures emptying of radiolabeled meal. Intestinal pseudo-obstruction is suggested by abnormal barium transit and luminal dilation on small bowel contrast radiography. Wireless motility capsule methods, it is used to measure transit in the stomach, small bowel, and colon by detecting the pH changes between regions, and also it can diagnose gastroparesis and small bowel dysmotility. And the small intestine manometry helps find pseudo obstruction of the bowel. Coming to the treatment, antiemetic agents, and um, we are going to discuss mainly the mechanism or the antiemetic agents which we use, and main clinical indications. So antihistaminics, dimenhydrinate meclizine, we are going to use for motion sickness or inner ear disease, because as we already saw, vestibular nuclei, the labyrinthine apparatus is going to be having histamine receptors, H1 receptors, and muscarinic receptors. So using his antihistaminergic and anticholinergic drugs, we are going to have relief to motion sickness or inner ear disease. Antidopaminergic agents we are going to use in toxin or metabolic induced emesis. Serotonin antagonists, mostly which we are using are ondansetron and granisetron, mainly indicated for chemotherapy and radiation induced emesis and postoperative emesis. NK1 antagonist is mainly aprepitant. It has been recently found to be helpful in chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting, especially delayed chemotherapy-induced nausea vomiting. As we already saw, NK1 receptor is mainly involved in delayed emesis post-chemotherapy. TCS, amitriptyline nortriptyline, in cases of chronic nausea vomiting syndrome and cyclic vomiting syndrome, antidepressants can be used. Other antidepressants like mirtazapine has also been effective in chronic nausea vomiting syndrome. Prokinetic agents are also useful in case of gastroparesis mainly. And in special settings, lorazepam benzodiazepines can be used for anticipatory vomiting post chemotherapy. And glucocorticoids and cannabinoids also helpful in chemotherapy-induced emesis. Uh, Coming to the next topic, indigestion.
Hello,
Uh,
sir.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
Sir, சொல்லுங்க sir.
Yes, Imtiaz, tell me.
Sir,